There's a certain kind of responsibility that doesn't announce itself with words or ceremony. It just appears one day, quietly, like a shadow that stretches longer than it should. It's not dramatic. It's not chosen. It just becomes part of who you are before you even know what's happening. You learn to read the room before you can read yourself. You become the one who smooths things over, who anticipates needs, who carries weight no one asked you to carry. And if you've ever felt this, you already know what it means. It's not about birth order. It's not about being bossy or controlling. It's the quiet trauma of being the oldest daughter. Once you understand this pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. In the girl who apologizes for things that aren't her fault. In the woman who can't relax unless everyone else is okay first. In the adult who still feels responsible for holding her family together, even when no one asked her to. The oldest daughter doesn't raise her hand to volunteer for this role. She just absorbs it. Somewhere between childhood and adolescence, she becomes the emotional scaffolding of her home, the second parent, the translator between siblings and adults, the one who notices when mum is tired, when dad is stressed, when the household is tipping toward chaos. And she steadies it, not because she wants power, but because someone has to. Because if she doesn't, who will? Psychologists call this parentification. But that clinical term doesn't capture the soul of it. It doesn't explain the specific loneliness of being needed before you're ready, of learning to suppress your own needs, because there's always someone smaller, louder, more fragile who needs attention first. It's a quiet evacuation of childhood. Not all at once, but in small moments. The time you didn't cry because your younger sibling was already crying. The time you pretended to understand something you didn't because asking for help felt selfish. The time you became the example, the standard, the one who had to get it right because everyone else was watching. That's the origin. Not trauma in the loud sense, trauma in the accumulated sense, the kind that hides inside competence. Because here's the paradox. The oldest daughter often looks like she has it together. She's responsible, capable, mature beyond her years. People praise her for it. Teachers love her. Parents rely on her. Younger siblings look up to her. But underneath that composure is a child who learned too early that her value comes from what she provides, not who she is. She learns that love is conditional, that it flows more freely when she's helpful, when she's easy, when she doesn't ask for too much. So she stops asking. She becomes self-sufficient, not out of strength, but out of necessity. And that self-sufficiency becomes her armor. It protects her from disappointment. If she doesn't need anyone, she can't be let down. If she handles everything herself, she stays in control. But control is exhausting, and the oldest daughter learns this young. Attachment researchers often observe a specific pattern in children who take on caregiving roles early. They develop what's called anxious responsible attachment. They're hyper-attuned to the emotional states of others. They can read micro-expressions, sense tension before it escalates, predict needs before they're spoken. This isn't a skill, it's survival. When you grow up responsible for keeping the peace, you develop an internal alarm system that never fully shuts off. You're always scanning, always monitoring, always one step ahead of disaster, even when there's no disaster coming. That's what makes this trauma quiet. It doesn't look like trauma from the outside. The oldest daughter isn't acting out. She's not failing. She's not visibly suffering. She's succeeding, achieving, making everyone proud. But inside, she's running on a treadmill she can't step off. Because if she stops, if she lets herself rest, someone might need her, and she's learned that being needed is the only reliable form of being loved. So she keeps moving. She anticipates, she manages, she fixes, she performs the emotional labour that no one else even notices needs doing. And when she finally reaches adulthood, she carries this pattern with her like a second skeleton. It shapes how she moves through the world. She becomes the friend who always hosts, always plans, always remembers birthdays. The co-worker who takes on extra projects because she can't say no. The partner who overfunctions in relationships, giving more than she receives because that's what feels normal. She's the one people call in a crisis, the reliable one, the strong one. But who does she call? Often, no one. Because the oldest daughter has learned that her needs come last, that asking for help is weakness, that vulnerability is a luxury she can't afford. This is where the neuroscience becomes fascinating. When a child repeatedly suppresses their own emotional needs to tend to others, their nervous system adapts. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for emotional regulation, develops early, but it develops in a specific direction. It becomes skilled at override, at pushing down discomfort, at functioning through exhaustion. Meanwhile, the parts of the brain that signal rest, that recognize when enough is enough, those stay underdeveloped. The oldest daughter's nervous system never learned to identify her own limits because crossing them was the requirement, not the exception. So even in adulthood, she struggles to rest, to receive, to let someone else take care of things, because rest feels like failure, receiving feels like debt, and letting go feels like losing control over the one thing she's always been able to control, herself. But here's what's deeper. The oldest daughter doesn't just carry responsibility, she carries unspoken emotional truths. She's the one who remembers what no one talks about. The fights her parents had that everyone pretends didn't happen. The year money was tight. The time her mother cried and no one knew why. She holds the family's emotional history because someone has to remember. Someone has to be the keeper of what's real beneath the surface. And that makes her wise beyond her years. But it also makes her tired in a way that sleep can't fix. Because she spent her whole life translating feelings that weren't hers, absorbing tension that wasn't meant for her, becoming the emotional shock absorber for an entire household. That's not a metaphor, that's her lived experience. Jung once described the phenomenon of the over-responsible child as carrying the unlived life of the parent. The oldest daughter often becomes who her mother needed to be, but couldn't. She becomes strong where her mother felt weak, independent where her mother felt trapped, competent where her mother felt uncertain. Not consciously, but energetically. And in doing so, she loses access to her own softness, her own uncertainty, her own permission to not have all the answers. She becomes allergic to being a burden, to needing too much, to taking up space with her own pain. So she suffers quietly, privately, in ways that don't inconvenience anyone. And this is the shadow of being the oldest daughter, the part no one celebrates. Yes, she's capable, but that capability came at a cost. Yes, she's strong, but that strength was built from suppressing her own fragility. Yes, she's independent, but that independence was born from the belief that no one would catch her if she fell. So she stopped falling, she stopped softening, she stopped asking, and somewhere along the way, she forgot that she's allowed to. Clinicians frequently see this pattern in therapy. The oldest daughter who finally breaks down, not because something catastrophic happened, but because she's been holding everything together for so long that her body just stops cooperating. Burnout, anxiety, a vague sense of emptiness that she can't explain. Because how do you explain that you're tired of being strong? That you're resentful of a role you never asked for but can't seem to leave? How do you explain that you love your family, but also feel trapped by their need for you? These contradictions live inside the oldest daughter, and they don't resolve easily, because the people around her still need her to be who she's always been. Reliable, strong, the one who has it together, and she doesn't know how to be anything else without feeling like she's failing everyone. This is the unspoken grief of the oldest daughter. Not the loss of something tangible, but the loss of a version of herself she never got to meet. The version who was allowed to be young, to be messy, to need help without shame. That version got buried under responsibility, under the expectation that she'd always know what to do. And even now in adulthood, when she's built a life of her own, she still feels the pull, the invisible rope that ties her to her family's needs, to old roles, to patterns that no longer serve her but feel impossible to break. Because breaking them feels like betrayal, like abandonment, like proving she was selfish all along. So she stays, not physically, but emotionally, still the mediator, still the one everyone calls, still the one who shows up even when she's empty. And the cost of this shows up in quiet ways, in relationships where she can't fully receive love, in friendships where she gives until there's nothing left, in a body that holds tension in places she can't name. The oldest daughter often feels like she's living behind glass. She can see connection, intimacy, ease, but she can't quite reach it, because reaching it would require letting go, and letting go would require trust. And trust for her is the hardest thing. Not trust in others, trust in herself. Trust that she's enough without being useful, that she's worthy without being needed, that she can rest without everything falling apart. These are the lessons the oldest daughter never learned, because no one taught her. Instead, she taught herself to endure, to adapt, to become whatever was needed. And now, even when no one's asking, she still performs that role, still anticipates, still manages, still quietly ensures that everyone else is okay before she tends to herself. This is the inheritance of the oldest daughter. Not money or property, but patterns, beliefs. A way of being in the world that feels both like a gift and a curse. Because yes, she's capable of extraordinary things. Yes, she can hold space for others in ways that feel almost supernatural. But she's also exhausted, resentful, longing for a kind of softness she's not sure she's allowed to have. And maybe that's the question she's been avoiding her whole life. What if she stopped? What if she let someone else take the lead? What if she admitted she doesn't have the answers? What if she asked for help? The thought alone can feel terrifying. Because if she's not the responsible one, who is she? That's the identity crisis at the heart of this. The oldest daughter has built her entire sense of self around being needed, and the idea of being wanted just for who she is without having to earn it feels foreign, almost impossible. But it's not impossible, it's just unfamiliar. Because the truth is, beneath all that responsibility, beneath all that performance, there's a version of her that still exists. The one who wanted to play instead of supervise. The one who wanted to be held instead of holding. The one who wanted to fall apart and trust that someone would help her back together. That version didn't disappear. She just learned to stay quiet. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to let her speak.